that structures are put in place to manage the church. Boards, committees, and systems are formalized. This structure ensures that ministries function with consistent vision and healthy relationships. The church reaches maturity when each of these four elements, vision, relationships, ministry, and structures, are in place and firing on all cylinders. This is the peak in the life of a church, and it usually takes about 30 or 40 years to reach. Then the elements start disappearing, one by one, in the order they first appeared. Vision is the first to go, as the church continues to do what it has always done. New vision requires morphing, and if it doesn't change, frustration follows. And as the frustration goes, the past way of doing things work less and less, and then relationships begin to suffer. At this point, often a new vision is quickly squashed as the church continues to hold on to what we know. Eventually, ministries can no longer continue, and in the very end, the only thing that remains is the structure, the boards, the committees, the bylaws. I have to admit, when I read this, my blood ran cold. I think anybody paying attention can tell you that we're probably somewhere on this cycle that we don't want to be. I almost didn't include this morning because I didn't want to be responsible for bringing down a very joyous Sunday morning. But good Lord, how irresponsible would it be to gather together and pat ourselves on the back for the last 55 years without taking a moment to look and see what we might be headed towards in the next 55. The consensus of the report I read stated that church plants alone won't be enough to reverse the tide. Our older established churches desperately need to find new life and a restoration of their mission. It's pretty clear that we need to go back to the beginning and start again with nothing but a vision. 55 years is quite an accomplishment, but we must not allow it to end there. What began 55 years ago in a rented storefront on West Oakland Park endures to this day because of a vision. Vision carried those inaugural members from that storefront into the clubhouse of the Village Mobile Homes, and then another vision carried them to Tamarack and built the building we know as Herrick Hall. But that was not the end. Not by any means. A quarter of a century after that, another generation picked up the baton and built the very building that we're worshiping in right now. And now here we sit, another quarter century beyond that, and it's our turn to pick up the baton. It is our vision that will shape the direction of this church until the next generation takes over. What are we leaving for them? What of us who sit here now will be there for our children's children? What is it they say in that baseball movie with Kevin Costner? If you build it, they will come. That's not actually what they said in the movie, but it's what we all remember, so we'll go with that. Guys, we can't wait for more people to show up to tell us what our vision should be. We need to be proactive instead of reactive and cast a vision now for the kind of church that we want. Yes, it's hard, and yes, it's scary. But that's where we have the opportunity to live up to our name. Because what does it say on the wall outside the sanctuary, right there in big, giant red letters? What does it say? Faith, United Church of Christ. Faith. We must have faith that if we are undertaking a venture that God has called us to, that He will not leave us high and dry. He didn't leave Paul. Look at verses 16 through 18. At my defense, no one came to support me, but all deserted me. But the Lord stood by me and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed. If we cast our vision and then step out in faith like Peter walking across a stormy sea, God is going to meet us there. He's going to protect us. He's going to defend us. He's going to strengthen us and uphold us and rescue us from every evil attack. He hasn't failed us yet. He brought us out of the storefront in the mobile home park into a sanctuary of our own, 2 if you count the fellowship hall. He's brought us through hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, and famine. He's seen us through corrupt politicians, cruel governors. We're not quite through that one yet, but we're going to get there. Wars, economic recessions, and a global pandemic. He's stayed with us through empty pews, empty collection plates, and empty pulpits. Church, in 55 years, we have been through a lot, and he hasn't failed us yet. Why on earth do we think the next 55 years would be any different? What did we just sing? Great is thy faithfulness, morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. This church that we all love so much, this church that we call home, isn't just for us. Those responsible for the initial vision of Faith United Church of Christ have all since passed on. But the church itself continues as each new generation entrusts its care to the next. As members of the family of God, as heirs to the kingdom of God, we already know that we are a part of something greater than ourselves. But now we have to put rubber to the road. We must hold fast to our faith. Today we celebrate our history. We celebrate the legacy of the communities of faith that came before us. It is so appropriate that this celebration also falls on Pastor Appreciation Sunday, because to me, as we recognize the legacy of this church, we also have the opportunity to honor those men and women of faith who have been the shepherds of that vision. Reverend Melvin Dollar, Reverend Frank Nagy, Reverend D.B. Stouffer, Reverend Harold Steffens, Reverend Dr. Stanley Pizzell, Reverend Carl Whiteman, Reverend Dr. Ileana Bosenbark, and Reverend Dr. Sonia Williams. But you know, to me, I've always been something of a contrarian. And while I think it's very important that we recognize all the pastors who have served this church over the years, I think it's almost more important that we take a moment to honor those who filled in and did the job temporarily for a little while. We give a lot of credit, and rightfully so, to our pastors and former pastors, but our interim ministers over the years tend to be overlooked. Their pictures don't hang in the wall of the foyer. Their names aren't remembered with the same quickness or fondness. But they have kept the lights on. They have kept the building going. They have kept the vision. And they have been every bit as important to the continued success and survival of this church as those other names that we hold so dear. So this morning, let's take a moment to honor Reverend Riney Schradell, Reverend George Wesley Jr., Reverend Scott Collins, Reverend Michael McFarland, Reverend G. Dwayne Bontrager, Reverend William Mulford, Reverend Jack Ramaley, and Reverend Keith Scott, our current supply minister. We have been touched by their steadfastness and care during some of the most trying times in our church's history. We would not be who we are without them, and especially to Reverend Scott, who's here this morning and every morning, we offer our thanks and our love. We would not be who we are without them, all of them, interim or permanent, and we would not be where we are without them. Today we celebrate their vision and commit to forging our own. We step out in faith, secure in the promise that God willing, 20, 30, 50 years from now, someone a whole lot younger will stand behind this sacred desk and celebrate the contributions that we in this sanctuary right now have passed down to them. American composer Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote in his highly acclaimed musical Hamilton, "Legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see." So many things we do in life, we do with no real way of knowing how they will affect the future. One of the interim ministers I mentioned, Dr. Bontrager, were it not for him 13 years ago, helping me through the darkest time of my life, I don't think I'd be standing here right now. I doubt in all our years of conversations that he envisioned a day I would stand in the same pulpit he once did and thank him for his service. When Reverend Ileana asked me to bring the message for the first time ever all the way back in 2011, could she have known that a decade plus later I'd stand here, 2/3 of the way through seminary, a year and a few months away from a degree that leads